Well, good evening, everybody. Nice to have you with us. Thanks for joining me. And I'm finally ready to play another virtual concert for you. You know, if you've never joined me, this is really about the closest thing you can get to a real in-person concert with me without being there. And I'm still enjoying it. It's been fun. And the idea for tonight's concert came to me from about a year or maybe 2 years ago when I was doing a similar performance. I decided to do a concert called In Old New Orleans. And so this is going to be all old-time jazz from the Crescent City, New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where Dixieland jazz got its start. And of course, we'll be celebrating a lot of Jelly Roll Morton tonight. I think he's the greatest, most unique piano player that ever came out of that city. And so let's start with his very first published composition from 1915. And here's an original copy of it from my collection. I'm leaving it in the sleeve this time because this one's a little bit fragile. It's the Jelly Roll Blues, also called the original Jelly Roll Blues from 1915. Here's my version of it. Thank you very much. The original Jelly Roll Blues. Thank you, folks. Well, that's a fun start to the night. Looks like everything's working here on YouTube and Facebook. All three websites. Yeah. Well, as usual, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the music as we go along in tonight's concert. And one of Jelly Roll Morton's greatest inspirations was a pianist named Tony Jackson. Apparently one of the most legendary figures of the ragtime era, not unlike Louis Chavon in St. Louis. He never made any recordings or player piano rolls before he died. So the best we can do is read his compositions off of the sheet music. But one of them became an enormous hit, and he wrote this while he was still in New Orleans, but later on Tony Jackson moved to Chicago, and the tune was published there and used in a Broadway show as well in 1916. It's called Pretty Baby. And so I'm going to play that for you, complete with the original verse, the melody of which was preserved in a tape recording of Glover Compton, another early ragtime pianist who was a friend of Tony Jackson and Jelly Roll Morton. So here's Pretty Baby, and with it as a medley, a second song written by Tony Jackson, which came out the next year in 1917, called Some Sweet Day, which has been a favorite of mine for years, and I hope you enjoy it too. So here's two tunes by Tony Jackson. you very much. A couple of songs by the legendary Tony Jackson. They say that there was no song from any show or any opera in the world of ragtime or jazz either that Tony could not play by memory. He was called the world's greatest single-handed entertainer. And it's such a shame that he never made recordings. According to the book, They All Played Ragtime, the poor man died of the hiccups in 1921. I don't know whether that's really true. They interviewed his sisters for the book. I assume that's true. I'm sure it has happened at some point in history. But you know, a lot of his music, I think, survives through Jelly Roll Morton. I just have this feeling that a lot of his style came from Tony Jackson. And so let's do another piece now that was recorded by Jelly Roll Morton, although some of the melody may have really been by Jackson. And this is something that Jelly Roll recorded 2 or 3 different times over the years, and the record is called The Naked Dance. Apparently this is something that both pianists and many others used to do in New Orleans at the time. Jelly Roll said it was considered high art, and they would just make up ragtime tunes like this for the shows. So here we go with The Naked Dance. Thank you very much. There's The Naked Dance, essentially by Jelly Roll Morton, but also inspired by Tony Jackson. Well, usually at this point during the concert, I mention that I do accept virtual tips. I hope that I'm getting some new viewers once in a while, even if I can't do it every week. And I'm very grateful to all of you. You can send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo. The information should be in the postings on all 3 websites, as well as the chat. I have it pinned in there. Anyhow, well, and I'm happy to take requests, as always. I imagine there's a number that I will be able to get to tonight, and sometimes I get the requests ahead of time on Facebook, and I will print them out on my list here and try and play them for you. And of course, the theme for tonight's concert is in Old New Orleans. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the great piano players. There was, of course, Ragtime that came out of New Orleans, too. I think I played Dixie Queen Rag not long ago. But I imagine I'll focus more on early jazz tonight. And in fact, let me play this tune that's sitting right here on the piano. This one's a little fragile. I'm going to have to put that up here. I have an original copy of this. It's quite rare. From 1919, written by two composers, both from New Orleans, but they were not related to each other, Spencer Williams and Clarence Williams. And this became a traditional jazz standard. It's called I Ain't Gonna Give Nobody None of This Jelly Roll. In fact, I think I know all the words to it. I ain't gonna give you a piece of this cake to save your soul. My ma told me today, this very day, if I'd be a good boy, she'd buy me a toy. Now I'm my mama's baby boy. There ain't no use for you to keep on hanging around. I love you, but I hate to turn you down. I know you want it. You can't have it because I ain't going to give you none. And I'm going to show you this, even though it's politically incorrect. This is the original edition of the tune. Shortly afterward, it was printed in small format, 9x12, which is the copy that you almost always see. I have seen very few of these large format editions of this tune over the years. I was pretty thrilled when I was finally able to get a copy of it. That's the second copy I've found over the years. The first one was destroyed in the mail, and I was so disappointed that I've managed to find another one. Anyhow, here's a quick version of I Ain't Gonna Give Nobody None of This Jelly Roll. I ain't gonna give nobody none of this jelly roll. Thank you very much, folks. Well, I'm checking the chat here for requests. Yeah, I see a few there from Leo. I will certainly be playing those tonight. Let me see, what else have I got for you? I do like to go through my concerts in almost a chronological way, so I give the history of the music and you can hear how it developed as we go along. And I think what I'll play next for you is a piece that very well demonstrates the transition between ragtime and jazz. Commercially, ragtime came first, of course, and then the blues, which is just another name for it. And then the term jazz began to in common use in 1917. And that's when this tune came out, 1917. It was written by a pianist from New Orleans named Irwin P. LeClaire. I think it was the only instrumental he wrote. It's called Triangle Jazz Blues. So whether it's ragtime, jazz, blues, I don't know. If I had to make a comment, it's really more like ragtime, but that's my opinion. The Triangle Jazz Blues. Thank you very much. Triangle Jazz Blues. Wally Rose, the great ragtime pianist, revived that in the 1950s. So that's part of the inspiration there. And I'll never forget the late David Jason, the big musical historian from New York, told me that he went to New Orleans, I don't know when this was, probably in the 60s or 70s, I suppose, when Dave was beginning to collect ragtime music, and he heard Irwin LeClaire himself play the Triangle Jazz Blues. And he said it was full of all kinds of fills and runs and things that were not in the printed sheet music, and it was very different from the way that it was published. I thought that was very interesting. Now, let's do an example of early commercial jazz. And of course, the original Dixieland Jazz Band is credited with making the first jazz recordings in 1917. And they were famous for Tiger Rag, of course. Yes, I will play that later, the Jelly Roll version. And there's another piece that they wrote that I have long been a fan of, and so I'll play it for you now. From 1919, this is called Bluein' the Blues. Another cross where really blues and jazz, it sounds more like ragtime did in the early days. And the original Dixieland Jazz Band were all musicians from New Orleans, but made the transition to play in Chicago and New York before these records were made. Anyhow, here's Bluein' the Blues. blues. Thank you very much, folks. I see a number of requests here, and of course I will get to those in a bit. A number of them are already on my list, sitting here on the piano. I'd like to do one more early jazz tune that came out of New Orleans before I get into Roll Morton. At least one more. And this tune was written about 1920 or 21 by A.J. Piron, who also was an important music publisher in New Orleans, and became an enormous hit. It's called I Wish I Could Shimmy Like My Sister Kate. And the second line is because she shakes it like jelly on a plate. A lot of the jazz bands of the period played this at kind of a slow to medium tempo. I do this a little bit more up-tempo based on the Johnny Maddox version. I love the way Johnny used to play this. So here's I Wish I Could Shimmy Like My Sister Kate. I wish I could shimmy like my sister Kate. Thank you, folks. Let me check all the websites here. Well, looks like Facebook's working too. Bob Milne is listening. So nice to hear from you, Bob. Always a pleasure. Oh, Dave Goodlaxon. Well, we're going to miss you tonight. I owe you a text or two. Okay. Do me a favor, folks. Don't forget to hit the like button. It helps with the social media algorithms. Share it on your social media. If you enjoy this kind of music, I still want to introduce new people to this kind of music, and I'm working to do that every week. Well, let's move now to Roll Morton. Again, I think he's about the greatest piano player that ever came out of New Orleans. And I went for a couple of years without playing too many of his tunes. So for the last few years, I've been trying to work more of them into my repertoire. And in fact, this next one I only learned about a year ago. And this was one of Jelly Roll's very first recordings. I'll never forget, I was with friends in little town called Placerville, California, in Northern California, and found the original 1923 acoustic record of Roll Morton playing this. It's called Grandpa's Spells. And when we get to the third part of the piece, listen closely, because Grandpa's going to have some spells. Here we go. Hey, thank you very much, folks. Grandpa's Spells. There we go. Well, the music of Jelly Roll Morton is hard to beat. Not only was he a virtuoso pianist, but a great composer. And here's another tune that he wrote, a little bit slower tempo, and I suppose this has a little bit of the Spanish tinge in it. Not as much as pieces like The Crave, but this one, again, first recorded and published in the early 1920s, which is the case with a number of the Morton pieces. But it's called The Pearls, and I use a little bit of the arrangement off of the Jelly Roll Morton piano roll in this case. This was the only known Morton roll that had not been found until recent years, and I was lucky enough to get a recut of the roll. And on the B section of the piece, you'll hear that Jelly Roll Morton does a stop time effect on the fourth beat of the measure, which is pretty unusual. He didn't do that on any of the recordings, only on this one piano roll, which I think is very neat. So here is The Pearls by Jelly Roll Morton. you go, the pearls. Thank you, folks. I see someone asking here, what's the Spanish tinge? Well, a lot of Jelly Roll Morton's pieces included some Spanish rhythms. Now it's not the same thing as syncopation necessarily. That was something that was common in the Deep South in New Orleans. But that piece really doesn't have much of that. I don't know why I mentioned that. Anyhow, 163 total viewers. Thanks for counting, Carl. That's great. Appreciate it. Let me double check the streams here. We're up to over 50 here on Facebook. That's great. I appreciate it, folks. Only 2 on Twitch. Although, looks like there's a few that commented that I'm not familiar with. Well, I imagine some of you can guess what's coming next. I saw a request for this already from Leo Roth, a young ragtime pianist. We're going to do probably the most famous Jelly Roll Morton composition of all. Again, I didn't learn this until more recently, and I got it off the player piano roll. Sometimes I find that an easier way to learn the music. And he undoubtedly wrote this while he was still down in New Orleans. Jelly Roll started traveling the country in about the 1910s, and he named it for another pianist whose name was Porter King. So he switched the name around backwards and wrote the King Porter Stomp. Years later, it was recorded by Benny Goodman and his orchestra in the mid-30s, which is, I read this somewhere, it's considered one of the very first swing records. And I don't think it's hardly anything but the trio of the piece. Here's the entire composition, very much the way Jelly Roll played it. King Porter Stomp. King Porter Stomp. Thank you so much, everybody. I see a request here for the Finger Breaker. You know, I've been meaning to relearn that piece. I tried to play it once or twice as a teenager, and I'm sure I didn't get all the chords and everything right, so I do want to relearn that. I finally found the original 78 record of, in fact, the original title on it is Finger Buster by Roll Morton. And I assume they probably changed that title so as it would not be confused with Willie the Lion Smith's Finger Buster. I assume they probably changed the title later to Finger Breaker on the Morton piece, and that's why. But anyhow, let's do, well, I think it's time to do the piano roll demonstration that I'm planning for the evening. And this just occurred to me. I'm so glad I thought of playing this roll for you. I think this is one of the hottest piano rolls ever made. I have a small box over here, this is to my left, of all my very favorite piano rolls, the ones that I think are the most exciting and also some of the rarest ones in my collection. And this one's in there, even though it's the recut. You can see the label. Jelly Roll made piano rolls for the Vocal Style label, which is really funny because his music is about as far as you can get from sing-along style music. But he was on the Vocal Style label, and this is another one of his Stomp tunes. You know, a lot of the, you might call them the academicians, academic musicians, overanalyze this stuff. The reason his music is called Stomp is because people would stomp their feet. It's really not that complicated. And so this is the Shreveport Stomp from 1925 by Roll Morton. It's hot in here without my window air conditioners, folks. And if you've never listened to my concerts before, this is a 1913 Apollo player piano. The brand of the piano, however, is Melville Clark, which is the company that owned QRS, believe it or not, at one time. And this piano roll is particularly hot because Jelly Roll continues to improvise and go through variation after variation on the piece. It's a great piece in the first place. And with a piano roll, he could continue playing and playing as much as he wanted without the 3.5 to 4 minute time limit of a 10-inch 78 record. So what you get to hear on this roll is very special. Shreveport Stomp, played for us by Roll Morton himself. Make sure I get it in the right key before we go here. Okay, good. Just double checking. support Stomp. Isn't that the hottest piano roll you've ever heard? Well, now let me rewind it. Yeah, this is the blues tone recut. Without blues tone piano rolls, which are the recuts produced by Rob DeLand from Chicago, a lot of these great rolls would be unavailable, and I still would not have the vast majority of them. They're so rare, and there's, some of them, there were only two collectors, Trevor Tishner and Mike Montgomery, who had all the great, really rare early jazz and ragtime piano rolls. I have never seen original copies of these in antique stores, for instance. What you find in antique stores now is stinking Beatles records. It's just nothing like this. Well, now I think after that hot piano roll, it's time to do a blues number. Oh my. Piano's still squeaking tonight. Sorry about that. I'm going to show you the original sheet music from my collection, Tin Roof Blues, written by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. And this even has all the members of the band listed on the cover. Leon Rapolo, Paul Mayers, Benny Pollock, which I assume is Ben Pollock, who later led his own band, George Brunies, Mel Stitzel. They were the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, and this was probably the most successful tune they ever had. Published by the Melrose Brothers, which were the music publishers that handled Jelly Roll Morton's music, and a lot of other early jazz artists. The music they published was more jazz than it was pop. And so here's the Tin Roof Blues, named for the Tin Roof Cafe in New Orleans, by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. you very much, folks. Decided to play that at the last minute yesterday. Got out the sheet music. It's a really good blues number of the period. Well, it's after 7 o'clock here in Durango, Colorado, and so I usually make two announcements that I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. If you enjoy this kind of music, it's very helpful to my career, and that's kind of why I continue to do these virtual concerts every week. Not the only reason, I enjoy it too. But there's both PayPal and Venmo information in the postings. And if you don't trust PayPal, there's a P.O. box on my website for checks. And I should go ahead and announce that I'll be doing a virtual concert next Sunday again as well. It's unfortunately going to have to be a little bit sporadic for the next month or so due to the fact that I'm going to be out of town. I'm not even going to be able to do every other week. I'm just going to have to do it whenever I'm home. So next weekend, you know, I already had a good idea that came to me, something I have never done before. And the last 2 weeks, I've done music associated with certain cities. I did St. Louis Ragtime, and today is early New Orleans jazz. And so I thought, well, you know, next week, let's do the music of old New York. That'll allow me to celebrate Tin Pan Alley and the music of Broadway and even ragtime and stride piano that came out of New York. So that is my plan for next weekend. Music of old New York. I think it's going to be very fun. So please join me next Sunday night on all three websites. We'll do this again. And in the meantime, go ahead and send in some requests. Now that I've finished the Jelly Roll Morton section, I've played all the music I've got here on the piano. I'd like to try and get in some more requests for you. And I might even just wait a minute here because it takes a little while for the requests to come in on the chat. There's a little bit of a delay. I've got a few more here on my list that I will certainly do for you. There's some very famous tunes I haven't played yet. That will be towards the end of the program tonight for sure. Let me check Facebook real quick. No, nothing on Facebook here. Twitch. Got a question here on Twitch. Who wrote that? If you're talking about Tin Roof Blues, it's the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. Nick, I played Pretty Baby at the beginning of the program. It's a gorgeous song, of course. Yeah. Okay. I see requests here on YouTube for Louis Armstrong, and also, do you know what it means to miss New Orleans? So perhaps I'll play my little medley that I do of several songs associated with New Orleans. These are the ones I play most often when I'm playing for the general public when they ask me for this type of music. We're going to do Basin Street Blues, written in the late 20s, and then a tune that was written by Clarence Williams, who was from New Orleans. It's called the Sugar Blues. And then we'll follow that up with Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans? A really gorgeous melody, which a lot of people assume is from the early jazz period, but it's not. It was written for a movie in 1946, a movie called New Orleans, in which both Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday appeared. So there's a little history on that. I watched the whole movie once. It was quite long. I'd like to see it again. And anyhow, so here we go with Basin Street Blues and a few other tunes about good old New Orleans. you so much. Basin Street Blues. I was wondering if you would play Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans, and just as I tuned in, you were playing it. Well, I planned it that way, of course. I figured I would get a number of requests for that, so I saved it kind of for the middle of the program here. And, let's do another very famous tune about the city of New Orleans, although this was not written in New Orleans. It was written by Henry Kramer and Turner Layton, two of the really wonderful African-American songwriters who are based out of New York. And in fact, I believe this may have been originally written for one of their Broadway shows called Strut Miss Lizzie from 1922, I believe, way down yonder in New Orleans. And I even know the verse to the tune and the patter chorus. Way down yonder in New Orleans. Thank you, folks. Somebody says, I sound like Granny's old player piano. Well, I assume that's a compliment. This is Donald on YouTube. Yes, I have cut a couple of piano rolls. Unfortunately, they sold out way too fast, and there are no copies currently available. But keep checking the website for the piano rolls. It's called Jazzipation. My friend Domingo Mancoyo runs the piano roll company, and he did a phenomenal job producing the rolls and editing them. And there should be new ones coming out in the coming months as well. Let's see, what's next on my list? I think we're going to do a hot one now. This is another tune, just like I Ain't Gonna Give Nobody None of This Jelly Roll, which was written by both Clarence Williams and Spencer Williams. But this was after they had left New Orleans, and I thought I'd play it anyway. This was named for a nightclub in Chicago, and it's called the Royal Garden Blues. And There are words to the tune, of course. Hardly anyone ever sings them. Most people use it as kind of a fast piano showpiece. So I'm going to do that for you next. Royal Garden Blues. Thank you so much. Royal Garden Blues. Yeah, it's funny we were talking about the piano rolls that I made because that was one of the tunes I did. Royal Garden Blues and Deep Henderson was the other one. And Domingo has some more coming out. I'm not even sure that I'm supposed to announce what the titles are. He's been working on them for months. I think the holdup is some issues with Tim Baxter's piano roll perforator. But he has already edited the rolls for Pineapple Rag and a tune called Chicago Blues that I've been playing that I love. This is a piece that was recorded by James P. Johnson and his orchestra. Anyhow, those are in the pipeline. And now we're going to do another tune that came out of New Orleans. And I know that on a previous broadcast I have shown you the original sheet music I have of this piece. It's the only original copy I've ever seen. It was given to me by Johnny Maddox after he went in to the nursing home. He decided it was time I could have the piece. And it's so special to me because my grandmother could remember her father playing this on the guitar and singing this song in the 1930s. It's called Trouble in Mind. It's unusual because it's an 8-bar blues. And because I found sheet music, I can also play the verse for you, which not too many people do. The song was written by Richard M. Jones, an African-American pianist from New Orleans in 1924, and recorded at that time, I think, by some blues singer with Louis Armstrong on trumpet. And then over the years, so many famous jazz artists have done this tune. Not just jazz, but Bob Wills did it, the king of Western swing. And because Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys recorded it, So did a number of other country artists. I mean, I think Merle Haggard did it. I mean, just everyone. Even Janis Joplin, a friend of mine told me about that one day. This is Trouble in Mind by Richard M. Jones. Trouble in Mind. Thank you, folks. I recorded that on the Western Swing album I did, believe it or not. It's a fairly different arrangement. And there's verse after verse to that song, kind of like Frankie and Johnny. Endless choruses, I should say. Trouble in mind, I'm blue, but I won't be blue always, because the sun's going to shine in my backyard someday. Well, let's see. Send in some requests, folks. I'd like to have some more. I've got time for another one or two, maybe three. Depends. I might just rest for a minute while you all send in some more requests. I don't suppose it would hurt to announce September is going to be difficult for me to get in a virtual concert because of my travel schedule. I'll be at a conference the first week of September, this is all I'm going to say about it. I'm going to play at a conference which I think will be good for my career, but I'm not paid for it. So I may need to come home and do a virtual concert. It'll probably be like the second Sunday in September before I can do one. Just FYI to everybody out there. The Crave, I don't know that by heart, Leo. I was talking about the Jelly Roll Morton Spanish tinge earlier today. Up to 4 on Twitch. That's great. Thank you, folks. Well, I don't see too many more requests coming in here, so I could really use another one. You know, I don't know Buddy Bolden's Blues. I mean, in a sense I do, because it's part of St. Louis Tickle, the Ragtime tune. But I really don't know that the way that most jazz musicians play it. Oh, I just thought of a tune I could play that I was thinking about doing it earlier tonight, and I haven't gotten around to it yet. So let's do this next. We're going back a little bit to the early days now. And, Black Bottom Stomp is another great one, but I don't know that by heart either. There's a really hot piano solo on the record that Jelly Roll Morton made of that. Anyhow, we haven't played the music of King Oliver yet tonight. And King Oliver was the legendary trumpet player that led the jazz band that started making records 100 years ago this year in 1923. Same with Jelly Roll Morton, actually. And King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, of course, is kind of where Louis Armstrong got his start. So this is associated with Louis Armstrong as well. Both of the guys are playing trumpet or cornet on the record of this. And it was recorded under two different titles. The original title is the Dippermouth Blues. And I finally was able to obtain the original sheet music. By the time the tune was published, it was going under the title Sugarfoot Stomp. So I'm going to play Sugarfoot Stomp for you now. I suppose it's the only tune I know by heart that was actually composed by King Oliver. He also wrote Dr. Jazz, which I've played, which is a great hot tune. But now, here is Sugarfoot Stomp. And I need some WD-40 down there. Sugarfoot Stomp. Thank you very much, folks. Well, I could still use one more request here. I see, let's see, Gustavo's, that reminded you of Roy Bargy's music? That's quite different than Roy Bargy. I'm not sure of the melody. I can't remember Sunshine Capers. Roy Bargy's music is sophisticated novelty piano, very different than New Orleans jazz, but sometimes you'll hear a little bit of a melody in a piece that you can't explain. Right? It reminds you of another tune. Yeah, Big Fat Ham. I've already done almost all of my Jelly Roll Morton repertoire. So think along some other lines, folks. I do have about two more things lined up here to play for you if I don't see a request coming in that I know by heart. No, of course, Nola, again, has nothing to do with New Orleans jazz. It was named for Felix Arndt's wife, Nola. It's a pretty piece, but would you believe I've never played it? I recorded it as a duet with Frederick Hodges, but I only played the bass on the piano. Oompa, oompa, oompa. So I've really never played the piece. Boy. Okay, well, let's go ahead and do this tune here I've got lined up. You know, I thought about playing What a Wonderful World tonight, but I would have to have the sheet music in front of me to do that. Sorry about that. We'll do another tune which is associated with Louis Armstrong. In fact, I think he's probably one of the people who's best known for performing this. It's kind of a folk melody, and by that I mean no one really knows who wrote it. We're going to do When the Saints Go Marching In. I'm surprised no one has requested that yet. And the way I do this, I borrowed this arrangement from Johnny Maddox. I really love it. He threw in a whole bunch of other tunes that were popular in New Orleans, including the famous High Society March, which I think makes the piece just so much better because, of course, When the Saints Go Marching In is a very short piece of music. There's not much to it. So we're going to do High Society March, and then, well, that's at the end. And I'm also going to play Down in Jungle Town, a tune that was popular with the Dixieland jazz bands. And after that, we'll do Oh, Didn't He Ramble, which was a tune about, well, that was played at New Orleans funerals. They played a lot of happy Dixieland jazz music at funerals in New Orleans in those days. We'll even do Down by the Riverside and then High Society. So here we go with When the Saints Go Marching In as a medley. Thank you so much, everybody. When the Saints Go Marching In. I hope you enjoyed that version of it. Boswell Sisters, that's a good idea. I can't think what tune I would do just right now to represent them. I have one more that I'm going to play for you that I had planned to close the concert with tonight, and I had seen requests for it as well, so I hope you'll be happy with this choice. Certainly one of the most famous rags that ever came out of New Orleans, first recorded in 1917 by the original Dixieland Jazz Band. We're going to do the Tiger Rag. And so many people have done this piece over the years. I have played 2 or 3 different arrangements of it. Decided that really the Jelly Roll Morton version is probably the best. It's the most unique and musically interesting. So we're going to do the Jelly Roll version of Tiger Rag, only towards the beginning, a little bit of the original French quadrilles on which the piece is based. They were dances that were popular in New Orleans, undoubtedly going back to the 1800s. So let's do Tiger Rag. Rag-a-rag. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciate you all listening tonight very much. And please join me next week for another virtual concert. I will be back next Sunday. And I saw Chris Drury checked in here. I'm hoping he's going to make it up here to tune my piano next week. We'll see. Haven't confirmed that yet, but it's about time. And thank you very much as well for the virtual tips. It's most appreciated. It helps me keep this music going. And I'll see you next weekend for Music of Old New York. That'll be something new and fun. Until then, good night, folks, and thanks a bunch.